start first with bleaching and also with the other things that degrade the reefs. Hard corals are the base, they're the foundation of the reefs. There's soft corals, the gorgonians, um, all the fish, the crustaceans, all of those things are great and beautiful and fascinating. But if you don't have the hard corals, you don't have a coral reef. And hard coral polyps are little animals that live in a colony, and the color that they're kind of translucent, and they have their little tendrils that reach out from where their base is. But they're dependent on zooanthellae, what's usually called zooanthellae, which are kinds of symbiotic algae to help process sugar by photosynthesis and help feed them. And on the other hand, the algae are dependent on the coral polyps. Now, when the temperature gets too high, the water temperature gets too high, or there's some really toxic pollution, the coral polyps will expel their symbiotic algae and they'll turn white. That doesn't mean that they're dead. It just means that they're sort of in the ICU at that point rather than dead. They need to be able, the conditions need to be such that their algae will come back and they will start functioning normally, and they will not starve to death. A lot of attention is placed on bleaching, and diseases can also cause the coral to bleach. But a lot of attention is placed on that and on global warming and the very real human activities that cause global warming. To turn that around, and even to slow that, takes an enormous amount of international, global political will. We don't have time to wait for that to stop practices that are also stressing the reefs. And things like, as I mentioned, pollution, runoff from agricultural practices, faulty agricultural practices, overdevelopment. If you think about places that when you began to scuba dive might have had a few little rented bungalows or huts along the beach, and now there's a 20-story condo right there on the beach. Well, even if you have decent sewage treatment, even if you have other practices, you have everybody reuse their towels in the hotel or whatever, having that many people, that many toilets, that many cars right there close next to such a vulnerable environment, it's going to cause damage. Cruise ships are a special thing of mine because you have these huge cruise ships that have 3,000 passengers on them. They also have like 2,000 crew. And when I lived in Galveston, I lived a couple of blocks from the cruise ship port. And I became aware that every port of call, a certain percentage of the crew gets to get off the ship and go call home and, go to CVS and buy toothpaste and all of that. Well, let's say you have 4,000 people getting off a ship in a community that has a population of normally of 9,000. Well, they just don't have the infrastructure to absorb that many people, even if it's that many people for just 8 hours. And scuba divers are also at fault for damage to the reef. I have been diving about 4 or 5 times with years in between the same section of the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef off Cozumel. And I noticed they're just chunks, people kick their fins in a way that knocks against the corals. And even if you don't knock off a piece of coral, you're killing some of those polyps when you kick them with your fins. People let their gauges drag. They're just not careful. And those areas of the Caribbean, like Cozumel that are closest to the United States are the places where less experienced divers tend to go for their first real dive vacation. So you have a higher percentage of people than you would, for example, at the flower gardens, which is a very challenging environment out there diving. And you shouldn't pet the whale sharks.